And we heard from Colin about perennial grains. And so now we're going to talk winter annuals, a very different component of the CLC basket of strategies. And we are, in Forever Green, a bit unique, we're kind of the only ones working on winter annuals directly in terms of the crop development aspect of it, to be clear. Plenty of other partners. But people who see themselves in this CLC mold, we're kind of leading the charge on these winter annuals. It's fair to say that they're probably a little bit less transformative than something like perennial grains in the traditional sense of doing something really new. But they have a different potential to be transformative, in a different sense, and that is through scale. So winter annuals, we hope, could potentially be the gateway drug of CLC agriculture, getting winter cover on the ground on millions of acres, while we continue to develop pathways for the many different perennials to come in and be part of the system as well. So what is a winter annual? A winter annual is a species that you plant in the fall. It grows a little bit in the fall, goes dormant when it's cold, and then comes back in the spring, and you harvest it that second year. So that's how cover crops work, your traditional cover crops, except those are not harvested. So the distinguishing feature of our winter annual CLC crops is that they're harvested. Sometimes we call them cash cover crops. You get the benefits of cover cropping, and you get to sell them. So they can winter annuals have the potential to directly contribute to higher productivity because you're using more months of the growing season, and you're not necessarily displacing the traditional summer annuals while still getting those environmental benefits. And it's not just about these crops alone. Winter annuals can be a diversification engine, creating opportunities and making the economics work better for growing other crops. So just one example, if you're growing oats, for the many benefits that oats provide, that's great. What happens after you harvest the oats? There's lots of good things you can do. You can plant forages, you can have a green manure crop. But another thing you could do potentially is plant winter camelina. It gives you that window to plant another crop that has value, and so they work hand in hand and they kind of support each other into a more robust economic system together. So our winter annuals fall into roughly 3 groups. We have what are essentially winter alternatives to summer crops that would look very similar if you just had a handful of the grain. So we're working on winter barley and winter durum wheat, hybrid winter rye, and winter field pea. Again, the end product is very much similar. And that has some good advantages. We have larger seed size. The market knows what to do with them. We have the high yield potential that comes with working with these well-developed crops. We also have emerging winter crops. Spring camelina is out there. It's still at a very small scale. The whole industry is developing. And so these are coming along and they have their own set of challenges, but also some unique opportunities that I'll talk about. And then finally, we do some work on hairy vetch, which is a traditional cover crop in the sense that it's not harvested. You're not getting economic value from the harvest, but it's such a great nitrogen fixer that there is a real economic case to be made for hairy vetch in a CLC crop rotation. Okay, so I'm going to focus most of this talk on camelina and pennycress. And I'm just going to run through what they are, what we've been doing on them, a little bit of their history and their crop development, and the status in the marketplace. So camelina and pennycress, who walking in today had not heard of winter camelina or pennycress? Again, we got a few people. Okay, so these are both in the brassica family. They're basically like a little cousin of canola. Same family, they produce a similar type seed. They're very, very winter hardy, and they grow in a short season. Those are the things that distinguish them from actual canola. And they're high yielding, up to potentially 1,500 pounds per acre. Everything goes super well. And a high oil content of 35 to 40% oil in those seeds. Now, if it's 35 to 40% oil, the rest is meal, and that's protein and fiber. So we have to find a use for that as well in the marketplace. And we got into this to cover the damn soil, just for review. We did not get into this to fly planes, but we have found over time that that is one of the major exciting potential markets for the oil from these winter oil seeds. You can also make other low carbon fuels. You can make bioplastics, anything that we might use petrochemicals for. You can use this plant-based oil, which just in that statement really captures a lot of the value proposition. They also have some potential as food. Camelina as it is, high in omega-3s. Pennycress, if you took pennycress out of the ditch and you used wild pennycress, don't eat the seeds. They are poisonous. But our scientists have been able to make them not only not poisonous, but nutritionally equivalent to canola. So that is a potential, it's a market opportunity that's out there as a possibility as well in the future. And then again, that meal, the best, most likely application is as a feedstuff. We actually put hogs here. I got to change that photograph. Hogs don't really like the taste of winter camelina meal, but there's great results for other livestock species, so poultry and cattle. So I want to explain how this works with some visuals. And so what I'm going to do is to first lay out what a conventional cropping system looks like. This is just the counterpoint. So let's assume we've grown some corn silage. We harvested in early September. And traditionally, then the soil is bare, especially with silage. There's really not much residue left. You go through the winter, and then come late April, perhaps early May, you plant your soybeans, you start to build canopy cover, and then you have full canopy cover, you've got your crop at the end of the year. That's the baseline, one of the baseline systems that we're targeting. And I just put it up there for the contrast. Let me run you through how it would look in a winter oilseed system. So we start with the same corn silage. That's one of the two large acreage crops that we recommend following. The other one being small grains. Both are harvested a little bit early. Both don't leave a lot of residue on the surface. So instead of just leaving the soil bare, you would get your oilseed, whether it's camelina or pennycress, planted. I have been signed out of my notes. Fantastic. Okay. Planted in mid to late September, maybe early October. We're seeing farmers do it even later than that. Sometimes that actually works really well. And just have to authenticate my login, no big deal. Snow still falls, and so what happens is those plants get up and they make small rosettes. So you're getting some soil coverage in the fall. Snow falls and melts, and as soon as it starts to warm up, the pennycress and the camelina start to grow. And this is the really interesting part about the system and the reason why I need these complicated slides to describe it. You can just harvest the oil seeds and then plant another crop. And it actually works pretty well for some small acreage crops like dry beans or sunflower. But it doesn't really work very well for the large acreage crop that we're targeting, which is soybean. If you plant that late, you're going to take a pretty significant hit on your soybean yield. So to make the system work better, make the economics work better, and I really should, I'll name check them in a minute, but we have two of the progenitors of this system in the room, Russ Gesh and Marisol Birdie. There's also been a lot of U of M researchers who have helped develop this. We has developed a relay planting system. So while the oil seeds are still growing, you plant soybeans into them at the same time you would plant those soybeans in your other system. Only difference is you've got 6-inch tall camelina plants in the field too. And so you arrange your planting rows so they're not in too much competition. And then you have this intercrop period where they're both growing. The camelina or pennycress is getting tall, the soybean is coming up underneath it, but there's this large height differential. And then as the oilseed flowers and matures, you're able to just harvest the oil seeds right over the top of the beans. Lift up the header on your combine, and farmers have been successful at this. And then the soybean continues to grow. This is an actual picture of beans planted in this way. Yes, they're a little bit smaller. They're a little bit behind your traditional beans. They catch up and pretty much mature at the same time. And as far as the outcomes for the soybean yield, it depends on a few factors. We do see at times reductions of yield up to 30%. That's probably not acceptable if that becomes the standard and we can't break through that. So that is a challenge that we're still working on. But we also see, both in research stations and on real farms, a yield reduction as low as 10% or 15%. And that can be economically acceptable for that farmer and environmentally still very beneficial because, I'm going to jump to this first. Because when you combine those two, even when you get a 15% or so reduction in your soybean yield, the oil output from the camelina or pennycress is great enough that you can have a 50% increase in the total oil output from that acre in that year. So there's this big picture concept of sustainable intensification. It's much debated. It's often used to describe the same old stuff we've been trying to do. I think this is a great example of where it can be real because you're intensifying the output. You're giving the world more of what we need, and you're having true sustainability benefits as far as impacts on the soil and water. So where can we do these systems today and in the future? I'll go back to this slide. Today, and again, Minnesota as an illustrative example, coming after corn silage or wheat, going into camelina or pennycress, and then relay beans the next year. Right now, there's about 2 million acres in this state where we could potentially deploy this, and it's limited by the left side of the chart, which is those larger acreage crops that are harvested early. In the future, we hope to be able to do this after corn as well, and there's been good research done, including by Yusuf Mohammed here in partnership with Russ, to figure out where's the sweet spot where we can get these planted following your grain corn, and then that opens up many, many more acres. Okay. So you're hearing some hints as to what some of the ongoing challenges are, and they're real, but we are working on them. So back to this point, we're getting up to 50% more oil. And why is that important? Why is more better? And I kind of feel like in America, you never ask this question. More is just better. But more is better in this case for the climate. Or I guess the question is, why is more better for the climate? And it comes down to the way we use our land globally, and also the way that we are part of this interconnected global marketplace. So when you take something off of the market, a globally traded commodity, you are reducing the supply, increasing the price. And that has ramifying effects around the globe. So if soybeans are more valuable, more people will try to grow soybeans. And as was alluded to earlier, there's not a whole lot of new land being created. And so they have to go farmers will have to go find land where they can do this. And that often results in the conversion of grasslands and forests to agriculture, which does two really bad things. There's a giant carbon debt as you do that conversion, and all of that carbon that's been stored in that perennial system is lost to the atmosphere. And there's also the huge biodiversity hit, which to Steve's point earlier is generally not kind of counted in the accounting of these systems, but is incredibly significant for the future of our planet. So by putting more oil into the system, not taking oil out of the system, we can be on the side of avoiding this kind of indirect land use change, while also having positive environmental impacts at home, so to speak, right where we're growing that crop. And because of this, because of the low indirect land use change, because of being relatively low input crops, the oil and the fuel that's made from camelina or pennycress can emit up to 70% fewer greenhouse gases than your traditional jet fuel. Is it zero? No, it is not zero. And we're not even making any claims about potential carbon sequestration in this accounting. Some work is ongoing. It's somewhat promising, but everybody knows that carbon sequestration claims, especially for a short season crop, are a little bit dubious. So we're not making those claims. What we're showing is that you take one of the most polluting things in the world of petroleum fuel, and you replace it with this, and you can make a big difference. We'll hear a little bit more on that from Jeff Davidman with Delta a little bit later. We also show that you can reduce nitrate leaching very significantly. So looks strangely similar to what we saw from Kernza, and they're vastly different plants, an annual, a perennial. The 10-foot root system of Kernza versus this much less robust looking plant. And yet what we find, again, research from ARS and Morris, is that compared to business as usual of a fallow field, even when we're fertilizing pennycress and camelina at an economic rate, even when we put down nitrogen, we still are losing far less nitrogen out the bottom of that system because you have a green living plant that's there to take it up. And why is that? Well, the other day in the van, Josh Gamble said, I've got pictures of camelina roots. And so I said, I need them. And so here they are. I actually had no idea about this. This is a meter deep root core that Josh's team took a few years ago. And down here, 80 centimeters, 90 centimeters. So down basically at a meter deep in mid to late April. So this plant has just woken up from the winter. It's already got roots going down a meter deep. And theoretically, that's probably not the end of that very root, right? So a meter deep, potentially plus, and that's why we're getting this incredible outcome for nitrate pollution. So in summary, these crops are very low on carbon. They protect biodiversity. They have high productivity and scaling potential. 2 million acres today possible, just in Minnesota, 8 million in the future, we hope. And they protect soil and water. So thinking about sustainable aviation fuel, or SAF, what strikes me is that with these crops, sustainable aviation fuel can actually be sustainable AF. Yes, I got it in there. You guys are my test audience for that joke. I'll refine it. Okay, so back to some notes. All right, so I want to be clear that this really beautiful story that I just told you is a story about potential. It is not really a story about where we are right here today. But we can see, and we are going to be investigating in a deeper way, the path to get there. So, just to put it in context, a tiny bit of history. We have in this room, was already there. We have in this room Dr. Russ Gesch, spent his career at USD ARS in Morris, and then Marisol Birdie as well at North Dakota State. These two, over the last 30 years, have developed the agronomic system with many, many colleagues, including folks here, Samantha Wells, Greg Johnson, Axel Garcia, et cetera. So Forever Green and U of M has been part of that agronomic development, but really our big contribution has been in breeding. And this is really between camelina and pennycress, a tale of two crops. So camelina is an ancient crop. It's been grown for thousands of years, mostly as a spring type, mostly in Europe, and it was kind of forgotten. So we need to bring it back and revive it and adapt it to where we are. Pennycress, on the other hand, is a ubiquitous weed. It's found on, I think, at least 6 continents, and has basically been the bane of farmers historically. But legend has it that a number of years ago, Don Wise was at a bar in Coates, Minnesota, and with his wife, Bev. So they identified it in the ditch outside the bar, pulled it out of the ditch, and that became this line known as Min 106. So we brought that together with one of our great scientists, Dr. David Marks, and he had a partner down at Illinois State, John Sedbrook. Using Min 106, they turned this crop, this species, from a weed into a crop in under 10 years. So they found mutations that gave us the key characteristics of a crop. And this shows the value of the investment in the research, right? They made it so it doesn't create a seed bank. It doesn't germinate year after year after year like a weed does. The seeds stay on the plant instead of falling off. They have to stay on the plant if we're going to actually harvest them. And it lowered the glucosinolates, one of the reasons why you don't want to go eat wild-type pennycress. And then additional mutations that can make this into a high oleic canola-type oil, if that's the direction that we want to go to in the marketplace. So with all of that work, we now have a couple of lines that are in essentially pre-commercial testing. There's 2 acres on campus, 2 1-acre fields that are, some of that is going to go to our partners at Cargill later this summer to be crushed, to be evaluated, to be looked at as something that we can move into the marketplace, a minimum viable product. Okay, so that's pennycress. And the last piece on pennycress is, David's work kind of laid the groundwork, and then it's moved to Julia Zhang and Jim Anderson working together to bring this forward in a full breeding context. Camelina is a very different story. Again, we've got a similar team. Matthew Ott has been a major contributor to this work as well. And the big thing here is that we have an early maturing line. Early maturity is a challenge for camelina. We've got a line that's also in pre-commercial evaluation. So what are we doing in the marketplace? We're mostly talking about camelina, and that's because the regulatory picture is a little bit more favorable for camelina. But you still see a lot of red over there on the left side. So we still have a lot of barriers that we need to work through to be able to get from the potential that we're at to the scale that we want to see. Pennycress just faces more of those barriers. Brief nutshell, in 2021, Covercress, which is also commercializing pennycress using some of our genetics, got a massive investment from the private sector. This brought the whole ag industry to our door, and we had to figure out who do we want to dance with? Who's going to be our partner? And MBOLD helped us get some camelina in the field. Lyle, who's here today, walked out in that field and said, this might work. And so 2 years later, after a lot of conversations, we decided that Cargill would be an early and critical partner on this work. And there was actually some shared goals. Now, I don't think Anna will be too upset with me, Anna from Cargill, if I say that probably most people wouldn't have thought that Cargill would be our partner on sustainable new crops, okay? We all know reputations, right? But we had shared goals. We both want to get to scale to make an impact. We both want to develop a broad industry that can get that scale, where a lot of this space is going to very narrow kind of vertically integrated approach. And Cargill agreed to keep all of the intellectual property in our hands. That was a huge factor in our decision to move forward with them. They're also based here so we can serve farmers here. So what are the pieces of that? A philanthropic gift, a research collaboration. We're doing on-farm piloting together. We're doing market development together. They helped us get a $10 million grant from the Department of Energy. which is now in the ether, but it was a great partnership. And we're working together on policy aspects like crop insurance. So, whirlwind tour. 2 years ago, we did 2,000 acres together. And some of that flew a plane. I'm going to let Jeff do the rest of that storytelling. And we did this great reflections report with support from MBOLD. We learned a lot. I'm going to have to cut this. But that's what I was referring to earlier. You have to try it in a real way or you don't actually know what you're doing. So doing it and treating it like that real world experience or experiment is very important. Now in the ground, there's 5,000 acres with Cargill, and I think there's ambitions to grow that this coming fall. The last slide, what is the scaling trajectory? Well, it really depends. It depends on many of the people in this room. So what is the scaling trajectory going to be? We kind of have a couple of options. And so we want to be on that top line that hopefully is going to get us to around 1 million acres by 2035. But right now we're kind of on the low line because broadly speaking, the investment is pretty minimal. We have some existing infrastructure that we're trying to utilize. To get to the higher line, we need a much more robust investment. And Cargill's gift is a great start. The state of Minnesota support is a great start. We need to greatly expand that, and we need the federal policy and state policy support to help us along. Okay, so to tell us more about that journey and to mitigate the amount that I get yelled at later for the time I've taken, I'm going to invite JoAnne Berkenkamp up here. And JoAnne is the Managing Director of the MBOLD Coalition and a key partner in this work to scale winter camelina. So thanks, JoAnne.
So everybody, I gotta say it's really nice to look out at this audience and that almost everyone in this room knew what camelina was. Like, it illustrates the progress in the last 5 years. 5 years ago, that would not have been true. So like, it's a testament to the work of so many people, starting with Forever Green and a lot of partners to make that a reality. So it's great to see you guys. As Mitch mentioned, I'm JoAnne Berkenkamp. I'm the Managing Director of the MBOLD Coalition. And I want to talk with you about our pathway for taking camelina to scale and moving it from where we are at like 5,000 acres up to 1 million, right? To get to that point where the market can really run with it. And how do we get to that tipping point? So as you may know, just briefly, MBOLD is a coalition. We're based at the Greater MSP Partnership, and we include a lot of the kind of leading lights, I think, in the business community and the innovation community that's based here in Minnesota, but with national and global reach, working to drive sustainability in the food system. And we have been very proud to partner with Forever Green for 5 years and running around particularly camelina for all of those kind of cash crop benefits that you get environmentally and in terms of farm diversification, right? And so we've been on this path together. So here's the question that we're faced with now, as Mitch described that curve. What will it take to get to 1 million acres of winter camelina? So you see up here a lot of the parts, and there are others, right? But the farm technical assistance, understanding the agronomy, the breeding, the crop insurance we've started to work on in conjunction with Compeer, all the supply chain infrastructure, market development around multiple parts of this plant. And so we're really now, as a group, embarking on this process of what could be the roadmap to kind of integrate systemically all of these pieces for us to move toward that 1 million mark. So we've embarked on a roadmap to start figuring that out. We have a core team you can see here who's on it. Forever Green is the main project lead. MBOLD is the lead for the convening aspects of this. Steve Morris from MEP, Trevor Russell and Whitney from Friends of the Mississippi River, the SAF Hub at Greater MSP with my colleague Julia Silvas, and then also Michael Roberts at the McKnight Foundation. So that's kind of the core team that's guiding this work. And then shortly, we'll establish a partners circle that'll have, I don't know, maybe 40 or 50 people that are part of that. We welcome everybody in this room to be part of that effort. And that group will really provide guidance and review as this effort moves along. So we anticipate having the first convening of that partners circle probably late September, early October, and we'll circle back with folks on the date for that when that gets settled. So we are very fortunate to have now actually a robust group of funders for this 1 million acre roadmap, including the Builders Initiative, MPCA, with federal dollars that are flowing through that agency, the McKnight Foundation, National Wildlife Federation, and then lastly, the Minnesota SAF Hub. So we're thankful that we can pull together the resources to really do a robust job of this roadmap development. And then here's generally the timeline. Here's what's going to happen. So we've put out an RFP, and we'll select a consultant or a consulting team to lead this effort. Probably within the next 2 months, we'll have that team or individual identified. Then the first deliverable is going to focus on kind of these questions around market research, pricing, economic modeling, that piece of it, which as we all know is like fundamental to this crop getting to scale, right? So it'll look at questions like, what's the potential market size? What could the growth rate look like? What could pricing look like? What about current profitability for farmers, right? And in that study that Mitch mentioned that MBOLD and Forever Green just released a few weeks ago, there's some great analysis that Matthew Ott had led around production costs and current profitability for farmers, right? So we've got some directionality on this, and we'll go more deeply into that, with the aim in that first deliverable of getting to, like, what's the break-even price that farmers need and that supply chain stakeholders need, potential sources of demand will need, and what are those, what's the relationship between those break-even prices with the market reality for things like biofuels, for meal, for other elements that we could use this crop for. So we anticipate having that analysis ready 3 months after the consultant starts. We'll have a midpoint presentation and discussion about 6 months out, the first draft of the roadmap then at 9 months, and we'll wrap it up within a year. So that's our trajectory. And I want to thank our funders. I want to thank everybody else who's with us on the core team, and all of you who would be interested in being part of that partner circle to really help lay out that future together. So thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, JoAnne. Now I'd like to invite Paul Novotny to come up. Paul is a farmer, city council member, businessman, and a pioneer in both growing and processing. You can take that, Mike, if you want to. That's fine. Growing and processing Kernza and camelina. Thanks, Paul.
Hi, everybody. I'm Paul Novotny. I probably have a lot I could talk about, but I got strict orders that I get a couple minutes, so I had to write it all down, so I'm going to read it, I guess. This all started for me back in 2016 when I planted my first Kernza, and it was one of the first 3-year pilot programs, which went well for the first 3 years. But in year number 4, it was then my responsibility to store, monitor, and market this new grain, which turned out to be a challenge for a row crop farmer because I had big machinery, big carts, big grain bins, and it was not an easy task. So fast forward to 5 years ago, along with Kernza, I decided to take a crack at winter camelina and this crazy relay crop scenario, and I enrolled in another pilot program, which are great, by the way, because it helps take the financial risk away for the farmer, grower, and when things totally don't work out, as they did on my first go-around, as I had really great camelina, and I pretty much ruined the whole bean field harvesting them. And so, learning curve. So I guess, right, try it again next year. But again, the same as with Kernza, the harvest and post-harvest challenges arose again, managing these seed hulls and this very small seed, which wasn't normal for me. I figured out quickly I needed some help. And it turns out there weren't many or any options. Still not deterred, I kept on learning and more each year, knowing that if we don't make a post-harvest a lot easier, there would be no way I could get any of my farmer friends to give it a try because they all thought I was absolutely crazy. So if not working full-time at my family's trucking company and storage business and farming 1,500 acres and running a retail hunting store and being on the Chatfield City Council wasn't enough, I got convinced by some partners that it would be a good idea to apply for an MDA grant to help with post-harvest CLC crops, mostly camelina and Kernza. And lucky me, I was awarded a $50,000 grant to start the storage and cleaning site in Chatfield to help be that person to call when somebody needed some help. Which last year I cleaned, stored, and shipped grain for 3 growers, helped them out. I also took a step on my own and made it a $40,000 investment in the seed cleaner, which then made it self-contained and mobile so it could serve other growers around the state that didn't have to actually come to Chatfield. We could take this unit to other locations. So having the site available was what one grower in my area was the last straw for him to move forward. He planted 90 acres of camelina last year and last fall, and so I'll help him with that with this year. And then 2 others have committed now that they have a site and a cleaner, gave them enough confidence that this fall they plan on planting 50 acres each. So we're boosting some acres in my area. And basically, lastly, I think the continued investment in de-risking growing, at least for now, these crops and more investment in post-harvest and supply chain will certainly help build on our successes so far. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul. I think that's a great example of how, a crop that's developing more in a commodity direction also can still create opportunities for an individual farmer, operator, business person to be part of the whole ecosystem to make it work. I got to say that it's pretty gratifying to hear so many people tell this story, because it's our story, and more it's becoming our story, the big hour, and not just the Forever Green story, right? It takes a village, to quote Lyle DePauw. And so our last villager is Jeff Davidman, the Vice President of State and Local Government Affairs at Delta Airlines, a critical player in the development of the SAF industry in Minnesota and beyond.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for this opportunity. I will say, starting out, I've been talking about SAF now for about 2 years. I've never had 5 minutes or less, so I'm going to do my best. But whoever's got the cards, you got to start waving them, because I like this stuff a lot, and I love talking about it, and I will get out of control. So I will do my best. And it is great to be back here at the University of Minnesota, great to be back with the Forever Green folks. It was about 1.5 years ago that we actually told a bunch of people in Atlanta they had to come up to Minnesota to go to some farmland and look at some crops they've never heard of before, because this is going to be part of the secret success as we try and solve SAF. And sure enough, we did. We brought up an entire team from Atlanta. We toured the fields I think a lot of you were in yesterday, then went into a similar sized classroom and really sat down, rolled our sleeves up, and really started to learn about it. And the end result of it is the first ever flight from Minneapolis St. Paul International Airport using SAF departed last year from Minneapolis to New York, and the feedstock for that SAF was winter camelina. And we were really excited about it, and it started just a few months before having those conversations. So that's where we got to, which is extremely exciting. But just generally why we're here and why we're so excited about this is that for Delta Airlines, we have a goal to get to net zero by 2050. And when you look at that and you look at our carbon footprint, we can do a lot of stuff on the ground, but at the end of the day, 98% of our carbon footprint is what happens in the air. And when you look at that 98%, 70% is fuel. And so we know if we're going to get to our goals, the main problem we have to attack is the fuel we're using today, and to find a better way and more sustainable way to do that, which is that opportunity for sustainable aviation fuel. And it works. Well, what's really exciting about it is we know SAF works today. It works in our planes. We flew it last year from MSP. We know it works. It works in our engines. It works. We know it works at our airports with all of our infrastructure that we have. So SAF works. The problem is we just don't have enough of it. So right now in the world, there's about 300 million gallons of SAF that was made last year. That would basically operate Delta Airlines planes alone for about a week, right? So the goal in the US is to have 3 billion gallons of SAF by 2030, which would be about 10% of the use for US carriers. If you take that globally, 50 billion gallons of fuel. What did I say? We're at 300 million gallons. We're trying to get to 3 billion. We have a product that works, but we have to scale that. And so as we look at that, we're looking at a lot of different types of feedstocks that we can use. And what's really exciting about it is if you look at the state of Minnesota as a whole, all the feedstocks that are potential opportunities for SAF are grown right here in Minnesota. And winter camelina, one that we probably didn't know about at the beginning, is now right at the top of that list, and we've been able to prove that it works. But as Mitch said, this is not Delta Airlines alone. In order to solve the goals that we're talking about, it truly takes a village. We call it an ecosystem. We are the end consumer. We know at the end of the day that if the product is made, we're going to buy that product and we're going to be the consumer at the end. But we need to create the entire ecosystem in order to get that spot. And that starts with the farmers, many in the rooms today, to the producers, to all the logistics to get it to MSP Airport. And what's really great here is in Minnesota, we are building and creating that ecosystem through the state of Minnesota and the leadership from the governor and the administration and the legislature. And I took a short little break today from the legislature where they're debating the future of the Minnesota SAF tax credit, which has really made the state of Minnesota a leading place for SAF. All the way to the Minnesota SAF Hub, which is made up of a number of different corporations, Friends of the Mississippi River, a lot of environmental groups, the Forever Green, and agriculture stakeholders as well, to all come together to try and figure out how to build this ecosystem. Because at Delta Airlines, we have said we want to make MSP the first airport where we can say every single Delta airplane that departs MSP has some level of SAF on it. We started it last year with one flight with winter camelina as our feedstock. And we're so excited about that continued partnership to figure out how we get more and more produced, more and more to MSP, and we can put more of that on our aircraft so everybody can fly and see the world and feel good about it as they do it. So thank you so much for the opportunity to be here.
Introduce our meaning makers for this session. So we have Margaret Wagner. Margaret is a former student of Don Wise, the manager of the fertilizer section at the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, and just a critical partner of ours in many different ways. Margaret serves on our strategy group and is a great thought partner in many different projects. Trevor Russell is the water program director at the Friends of the Mississippi River, a passionate advocate for clean water, a dog dad, and a key driver of our policy work. Margaret, if you wouldn't mind, from what you've heard from that great group of talks, from what I shared, from what we're seeing on the screen here, share some reflections.
Great. Thanks so much for being here and for everyone's contribution throughout the day. As I reflected on this, I think one thing you said early as you told the story, Mitch, was it was a story about potential. And I think it's really a story about progress. And so as I sit here and someone that works in an area of grand challenges and thinking about some big environmental issues around agriculture, it's easy to get fixated on the challenge that's right in front of us and why things won't work, why change is hard. But what I've heard today, and having been involved in this for over a decade as a student and now as a professional, there has been so much progress within the plant breeding and the commercialization and the market development. And to reflect on that and give credit to that is really important, I think, for all of us. And it also then creates new challenges and opportunities for us. And so within my role at the Department of Agriculture and a strategic partner to Forever Green and to many people in this room, I think that the progress we have and where we are within the commercialization of many of these crops creates new opportunities for public investment in this type of work and a stronger need for public-private partnerships. And the reflection that no individual industry can really solve these because they're multifaceted. So for one reflection on this, I guess, is maybe some of you have read the camelina progress report on the 23-24 cropping season. If not, there's a lot of gems in there. I fixate a lot on the agronomy, but actually my takeaway from that was the key partnerships that allowed that pilot to move forward. And so early in that executive summary, it just talks about the U of M as a research partner and bringing those crops from the lab out into the fields and the importance of having that material there. It talked about Cargill as a partner in that whole program and having the reliability of a market partner and also a strong market partner like they were to send trucks out and pick up the grain and bring it back. And then also the state partner, which really works directly with the farmers and is interested in managing and sharing risk with those individual farmers. So thinking about that model as we move forward, I think there's a lot there to just identify what roles can we play as individuals within our professional realm here in this room, and how can we match up those roles across maybe across the room so that we can be even more effective.
Excellent. Thank you, Margaret. Trevor, what would you like to share?
You know, we began the day talking about all the things we want from agriculture: food, fiber, fuel, clean water, climate, resilience, habitat, pollinator health. And I don't think any of our conventional crops can be optimized to meet all of those needs, but I do think we can optimize at a portfolio level by diversifying the landscape broadly. And I think winter hardy oilseeds are essential and maybe the single biggest part of that portfolio. I call them winter hardy oilseeds. I don't think we should call them winter annual oilseeds. The reason is we did polling and focus groups over the winter on sustainable aviation fuel with the Nature Conservancy and Fresh Energy with funding support from Ignite Foundation. And people don't believe that winter annuals can be a thing in a very cold climate. But if you call them winter hardy oilseeds, they get it and they believe they can overwinter and come back up in the spring. So just call them winter hardy oilseeds, winter annual oilseeds. People will think you're making it up. Why winter hardy oilseeds is really gets down to scale. You know, we're a part of this because we want to be the voice for the river and for clean water in this broader portfolio approach to diversifying our agricultural systems, and winter hardy oilseeds really are the things that can scale up. 5.5 million acres under the moderate adoption scenario in the Putting Down Roots report, closer to 8 million acres under the more aggressive adoption scenario by 2050. You can measure that kind of change in the Mississippi River. We think that the policy-informed markets, specifically around low-carbon fuel markets and sustainable aviation fuels, are the linchpin to success here. Just for reference, the renewable fuel standard called for about 15 billion gallons of ethanol. We're going to need 35 billion gallons a year of sustainable aviation fuel by 2050 to meet our aviation goals. So this is a large, emerging market. Aaron talked a little bit about risk, so I'll skip that part. But I do feel like the policy-informed market development is going to be essential to our success, both low-carbon fuel standards or clean transportation standards into the surface transportation space for renewable diesel, biodiesel, but much more importantly, I think the sustainable aviation fuel space. And there are a few things that we know we need to make happen if we're going to be successful. First, we want to optimize our life cycle carbon accounting to better account for the true carbon intensity of winter annual or winter hardy oilseeds. And we are working together to help make that happen and optimize that. The pathway to 1 million acres will give us a clearer sense of what the levels of investment we need to make at different places within the value chain for success. Don is here today in his way, and he would want me to say, but it's about the damn crop R&D. And you can't, of the three sort of pillars of this work, you've got your market pull, you've got your societal lift creating supportive policy and funding frameworks, and you've got that R&D push. And all three of those pieces have to stay in balance and work in harmony with one another. And so we can't have 1 million acres on the land today, but we can in 2035 if we do so in a really thoughtful, deliberate manner, and we make the investments that we need to achieve all of those sort of portfolio-based optimization goals, even if single crops can't get us everything we need.
I just want to reflect myself on there's low carbon fuel markets and robust ecosystem service payments. Those could be two separate things. They can be one thing, essentially, if the market is structured appropriately. So that could be a pathway to explore as well. Okay, so who has a question? Who has a thought? Maybe you have an idea of an innovation to get over some of these barriers, or maybe there's just something else that you need to share with this group.
I see meal price and meal functionality zeros. How dependent is the viability of SAF on a market for the press cake?
There has to be a market. So that probably just reflects the incompleteness of my overview, and I didn't emphasize enough how important that is. There has to be a market, and exactly the price in that market is a little bit dependent on the price of the oil, because ultimately it's a whole seed that comes into a plant, and then whoever's processing it has to market both of them, and the economics have to add up on the back end. So if they're getting a premium in the SAF market, let's say, because of being low carbon, maybe the meal doesn't have to have its own premium, but it all has to add up enough. And so if you're taking a big price cut on that meal, it's very difficult to make it all come together. So thanks for highlighting that.
I just want to add on to what you said there, and shout out to AURI here. That's here in Minnesota. When it comes to oils and fats, I'm really not worried about that because of the markets that exist today looking for oils and fats. The SAF market, the renewable diesel market is half the diesel fuel in California today. So it really comes down to the protein side. And so AURI is working on inclusion rates for the camelina meal, winter camelina meal specifically in monogastrics, 10, 20, 30%. So we're doing some of that work collaboratively here. So that should help. And then Additionally, we're long protein here in the United States, and Southeast Asia is short protein. So provided we can get it there, there should be a long-term market for that as well.
Context. Thanks, Aaron.
I would just like to ask a question of industry. Do you see any need or what changes would you make in your R&D, marketing, promotion, and supply chains as opposed to the way today you're getting mainly corn, soybeans, and wheat in the industry? What changes would you see that you, if any, that you'd have to make?
Apparently I get to be the honorary panelist today. Hi, I'm Anna from Cargill. In terms of changes of the rotation and the market and what we would see today, in the rotation on the farm, our biggest goal is to not replace food crops. So I want to be very, very clear. And when we talk about these markets, the policy doesn't support it, and we are a food company first and foremost. So we do not want to replace food crops, but we do want to have value add with that additional oil. So that is our mission in all of this. I want to make that very, very clear from the start. So hopefully that answers your question.
Well, I have two things to add. When as a grower and looking at a couple of things up there when it came to like eco service payments, right? And that's part of what keeps me going, and some of the risk is pretty nil to the grower at this point in time. It's just my time, and basically mostly my time. But one thing that I didn't catch on to right away is in the counties down by me, and specifically Olmsted County, planting winter camelina, it's considered a cover crop, and if I sign up the acres in time, there's a fairly substantial payment that comes along with doing that, which I missed last year. But so there's another aspect to get out to growers to really pay attention to which county you're in and what program they have, because camelina gets to the right height. I think it's about $100 and some an acre as a cover crop. So, and they allow you to harvest it, so you don't get kicked out of the program because of that. So it's a fairly big deal when farming at a whole. There's not a lot of money in it, but if you pick up a piece from here and another piece from here, it all starts to add up. The other part of it is the corn and soybeans that I generally grow. That's an up and down road. So part of the reason I'm exploring some of these other crops is to diversify part of my acreage to a more standard, just a different revenue stream that isn't plagued by up and down corn prices, up and down bean prices. We have too much, we have too little. And so that's kind of my rotation on that. But so I'm chasing it in a little different reason, is I'm looking for a diversity in my operation to get away from maybe always growing all corn and soybeans and and putting a portion of my portfolio into some other kinds of crops.
Hell yes. It is often a challenge. The question is the policy challenge of defining something as a cover crop versus a harvested overwintering crop. NRCS puts a very hard line between the two. Now, we have pretty progressive NRCS leaders in this state. So in this state, you can grow winter camelina and get NRCS payment for it. It's not called cover crop, but it's effectively the same. What Paul is talking about is this amazing program in Olmsted County that is, thinking about this in a much more holistic way and not putting up that unnecessary wall. And I just want to note, too, that in this room we have folks from the Land Stewardship Project who are working to push that model and make it statewide, and have gotten a level of receptivity at the state legislature. I don't think it's going to be rolled out statewide, next year, but are definitely hearing interest on exploring that further. So there's policy innovation at work to try to make this more possible. There's a couple questions coming in talking about, like, we're going to need a lot of this stuff. Is that going to be sustainable to do that much? And I think that might be a good last one to put in front of Trevor and Margaret, if you have thoughts on, is it a problem to scale this up really big?
I think the upper boundary logically would be to match our soybean acres. So, winter hardy oil seeds being rotated into or relayed with soybeans. So let's call it about an 8 million acre upper boundary. I think from a water quality, soil health, sediment, nitrate perspective, yes, we've modeled what we think the water quality implications of that system would be. And as applied to the transportation sector, we think it would be very compatible with our reducing greenhouse gas emissions and the number one source of emissions in Minnesota, which is our transportation sector. It may do so depending on how these crops are optimized, how research and development works out over time, and especially the nitrate needs of these cropping systems. It may do so by increasing or decreasing in-field emissions. And that's that variance that was in the Putting Down Roots report. And so as we scale, we can largely address emissions in our number one sector and most of our ag water quality and soil health challenges, but a lot is going to come down to crop research and development and how efficiently we can produce grams per megajoule per acre.
And I don't have too much to add to that. I just think as we think about at the Department of Agriculture, it's really about cropping systems. And as you think about integrating camelina, what other opportunities and where do they fit within the current existing systems? So with that, we work a lot on pilot projects. And so I think the idea that we start small and build from there, we learn a lot along the way. And that will kind of shrink the challenge of thinking of this as just immediately scalable into the pieces that, how do we get there? Well, we get there by taking that first step.
Thank you so much. Let's thank Margaret and Trevor.